Tonight we are in Edinburgh, not far from Murrayfield Stadium. It was here last March that Humza Yousaf won the SNP leadership and then became First Minister. But thanks to the media scrum, the past year has been about defence as much as attack. But what matters most to the people of Edinburgh? Let's find out. Welcome to Debate Night. Debate Night is the only show in Scotland giving you the chance to ask the big questions, answering them on a panel this evening. From the SNP, Jim Fairlie is MSP for Perthshire South and Kinrossshire. Jim came to politics late, entering Holyrood 3 years ago after working as a sheep farmer and running his own food events company. He also founded Scotland's first farmers market. Sue Webber is the Scottish Conservative MSP for Lothian. Sue worked in the healthcare industry for 25 years and was previously an Edinburgh councillor before being elected to Holyrood in 2021. Michael Shanks is the Scottish Labour MP for Rutherglen, previously a modern studies teacher. Michael was selected just 6 months ago to a seat that had been held by the SNP. 5 years ago, Michael left Labour, calling Jeremy Corbyn's leadership utterly unelectable. He rejoined the party when Keir Starmer became leader. Also with us this evening, multi-award-winning musician Colin MacIntyre. Under the name Mull Historical Society, Colin has released 9 albums, nearly 20 singles, as well as collaborating with Annie Lennox, Snow Patrol and King Creosote. And finally, Gabriella Bennett is an award-winning columnist and author. She writes about housing and architecture for The Times and The Sunday Times, and her book, The Art of Coorie, is a Waterstones bestseller. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. And of course, welcome to our studio audience. Great to be back with you in Scotland's capital city. And you can join in the discussion from home, wherever you are in Scotland. BBC DN is the hashtag you need to debate along with us on social media. And our Debate Night podcast will be available for you to download straight after the show. So let's get started. Our first question of the night comes from Julia Mackey. Julia, good evening.
Hello. As we approach the end of the rent cap on April 1st, where do you predict the rental market going?
Thank you, Julia. We are in Edinburgh tonight, where the council have declared a housing emergency. 3% cap on rent increases across the country runs out at the end of next month. It's been in place for about 18 months. Julia, how does this affect you? What's your position, your situation?
I'm someone who rents in the city and has for the last 5 years. So I predict it'll probably go up, for myself included, when the 3% cap is gone.
And are you worried where it could end up and how affordable that would be?
Yeah, it's hard to know when you see the news now and look at what rent's going for in the city for 2 bedrooms, that it could be a huge increase for myself.
OK, thank you. Jim Fairlie, this is your government policy. Has it worked? Has it done what you intended it to do?
I'm not sure that the jury will still be out as to how this is going to develop. But I think one of the first things that we should talk about, particularly here in Edinburgh, is the fact that Edinburgh currently has somewhere between 1,350 and 1,500 council homes that aren't being lived in. And they're not being lived in because Edinburgh Council can't get to do them up, renovate them, get them habitable for tenants to go into. And that's not a criticism of Edinburgh Council. That is just a fact that we cannot get the tradespeople, we cannot get the materials as a result of Brexit, as a result of the Ukraine war, as a result of COVID. So having that 1,500 homes back in use would help enormously. The rent cap, I think it was the right thing to do. People were in a cost of living crisis. We're still in a cost of living crisis. We're certainly far from out of it. And I think the government policy to try to dampen that is the right thing to do, but I understand that it is problematic for landlords as well as for tenants.
OK, Gabriella Bennett, you write about this week in, week out. Has it worked?
There's a good quote about economists that always springs to my mind when I think about rent controls. And it goes something like, there are 10 economists in a room, you can be guaranteed there'll be 11 opinions. That basically is to say that economists love a debate, they love a discussion, they don't agree on things easily. But there is one thing that economists agree on, and that is that rent controls don't work. Under no economic theory do rent controls work. There is no evidence of this. So to think about that as the context into which the rent cap was launched at the start of the pandemic is a really interesting thing. Now, A year ago, I did an investigation for the paper about the impact that rent cap, or that rent freeze, we should say, and eviction freeze has had. So the idea of freezing rent, the idea was that within tenancies, your landlord shouldn't be able to put up rent, and outside of tenancies, you're a landlord, you rent out a place, and a tenant moves out and someone moves in. So that kind of between zone, that was okay to put up rent. So we would have hoped that after 2 years of a rent freeze, that we would have seen no movement, or just a really small amount of movement. And what we found was quite startling. So we found that rents, just year on year, had increased by 15% in Scotland on average. In the worst affected council area, East Renfrewshire, that number was 19%. In Edinburgh, it was about 14%.
So how's that happening if the cap is 3%?
Because a couple of things. So within tenancies, you're not allowed to touch the cost of rent. But outside of tenancies, the rent can be put up exponentially, like whatever you would like to put it up by. So what we found were landlords are trying to desperately claw back the money that they feel that they are losing. And we are seeing unprecedented rent rises. There have never been rent rises as severe and dramatic as this, not just in Scotland, not just in the UK, but all over Europe. So it's a pretty devastating number to come back to when you look at it. You kind of look down the barrel of it. You know, that combined with this idea that under no economic theory do rent rises or rent control, work, the picture doesn't look great.
Okay, let's hear from people who are renting right now in the audience. Maybe there, yes.
So I've been renting now for about 7 years in Edinburgh, and if I moved out at this point in time and tried to move into another flat in Edinburgh, I'd be priced out, completely priced out. I'd probably have to move up north, or I'd have to move down south. I could not live in the capital city at the price at the moment, so...
What's going to happen after April to you? Have you any idea at this stage?
I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. I hope that my landlord is happy with me. So yeah.
Okay. If he's watching this tonight,
yes.
that's the plea then. Michael Shanks, how would Labour handle this? It was introduced with the best of intentions, this rent cap, during the cost of living crisis and post-COVID. Has it worked in your view?
Well, I do agree it was introduced with the best of intentions, because during COVID, we didn't want to get to a situation where we had people being evicted for not being able to pay their rent. But the problem is, the longer it goes on, the more difficult it is to ever get out of it. And we either end up in a situation where we're freezing rents forever, which isn't sustainable, or we're going to get the situation where there's huge increases when we do end it. I mean, just to give a personal example, a few years ago, I moved out of a rental flat, and the point about when the tenancy ends, there's no limit on what it can go up by, and it went up by £350 a month, and about 100 people viewed it and put in for it, and actually they ended up increasing it even more because people were so desperate to get the housing. And this is an acute issue in Edinburgh, but it's true across the whole country. And the root of it is we don't have anywhere near enough housing. And so it's staggering, really, that in the midst of a housing crisis, it's been declared in Edinburgh a housing crisis, but it's true all across Scotland. We've got a government cutting the very budget that will increase affordable housing. And the other side of it, of course, is that landlords are putting up costs because mortgages are also going up. And so we're caught between these two issues of there's not enough affordable housing coming into the market, and mortgage prices are continuing to go up. There's going to be millions of people this year who will face higher mortgage costs, and that's because of the economic incompetence of the UK government. So the answer is to invest in housing supply, but also to bring back some economic competence so that mortgage costs come down. And as a result, and it will take some time to filter through, rents will also stop increasing by quite so much. But I think there's a cliff edge coming that will be a crisis for a lot of people.
Okay, and there's also been concern as well about the rent cap, meaning that landlords have not been investing in their properties and maintaining their properties the way that maybe should. I'd love to hear from any landlords we've got in the audience here tonight. But gentlemen in the glasses on the end there, yes.
And just to say that I find it strange when they say there's a shortage of housing, when the council are giving building contractors permission to put student accommodation up all across the city, when what we really need is proper housing.
And more housing to be built. And I think gentlemen in the blue shirt down on the second row here as well. Yes, on you go.
As a landlord, the comments that are being made is exacerbated by many factors. One is that landlords are selling they're capitalising on the asset appreciation against a falling rent. So the yield is not as good, but the asset is still increasing. So it's a great time to bail out. They're not going to be replaced by other landlords, even up to maybe 3 or 4 properties. So it is creating a shortage by what the years has
Can I
said.
ask you, do you feel demonised as a landlord, especially by the way the rent cap was introduced?
Yes. Especially when there's other factors that may not be so well publicised that you couldn't evict. But when your tenants found that out, they stopped paying the rent. So bye-bye, and you chasing them for unpaid rent for what could have been about 2 years. At the Edinburgh rental values, 2 years is an awful lot of money to lose.
Thank you, thank you. And the gentleman in the green sweater there. Yeah, on you go.
Yeah, I mean, as I understand it, when the rent cap ends, the landlords can charge up to a maximum of a 12% increase. And as you said, Gabrielle, the market in Edinburgh is around about 14%. So we're looking at probably a maximum 12% demand from most landlords. Given the cost of living crisis that we're all in, would it not have made more sense? I understand a cap can't last forever, but would it not have made more sense to phase an increase rather than allow a jump from 3 or 4% to 12% immediately?
Right. That's an interesting point. Sue Webber.
Well, the phase in increase in rents would have happened if there hadn't been a rent cap in place. I suppose that's what Gabriella is probably alluding to a little bit. We know rent caps don't work, but I very much sympathise with the gentleman in the second row there about the demonisation of landlords. Landlords have the same pressures on their costs as everyone else has. And I think the fact that so many are now deciding to leave the market and take their homes and return them to family use is again making the supply less in the market. And before, if you don't mind, Jim, the council does have a large number of void properties, and my casework load is challenging around housing in Edinburgh. The quality of housing is poor, and I'm always made aware of these voids, is what the council calls them. And if there are as many as have been made out, over 1,300, the council should be expediting those homes, because that's the social rental sector. And I still don't think getting those habitable is going to solve the issue. I think if you've got silver priority in Edinburgh, you are waiting 2 years for a home. And that is...
But bringing 1,300 to 1,500 houses back into
it will help.
properties is definitely going to help. But the point the gentleman just made there, and I've got to absolutely put my hands up here, I'm not an expert in the housing market in Edinburgh by any stretch of the imagination.
5,000 families in temporary accommodation in Edinburgh tonight.
But I think I'm right in saying that that increase, the cap of 12%, is quite a convoluted way to get to 12%, because you're not allowed to put it up by more than market value, and then there's an incremental way to get it to that. Don't ask me to explain it because I don't understand it myself. But I've got a colleague who's currently looking for a flat, and they've looked around on the websites, and there's between 40 and 50 flats, and they're all saying reduced rent, at a reduced rent. This is reduced rent from. So it seems that what's happening is the rents are actually coming down in some areas for particular flats.
It's not borne out by the figures, though. The figures, from really reputable sources, from those professional macro data sets, still show that there's this creep every year. Every time those data sets are taken, there's a constant creep. And I just want to come back to this gentleman's point, because I think this is really interesting, and I think it's easy as a tenant, or even as a journalist, I suppose, to demonise landlords and see them, but actually they're part of the solution, and they absolutely must be part of the solution, because a healthy rental market has equal parts of good, well-researched policy, tenants who are, well-behaved and clean and do their thing, and play by the rules, but also landlords and lots of landlords. The more landlords you have, the more choice tenants have, the more empowered they are, and the more, that whole ecosystem just flows and works so much better.
OK, there's a lady, hang on, Jim, there's a lady who's desperate to speak with glasses in the middle here. Yeah, on you go.
I personally think that the whole idea of having lots of landlords and for people to be able to own homes to then rent out at whatever rent they decide, even if it's capped, they're still, if it's a failed business model because they're not making enough to cover their costs, then it's a failed business model. We need to get back to a situation where there's not the incentive to put your property over to Airbnb and the likes. Edinburgh has become like Disneyland in many parts because it pays people to have a second property and then let it as a tourist destination rather than giving it over to a family as a secure home.
So see homes as just that rather than an investment opportunity?
I feel really sad that that young woman is feeling scared about what will happen to her in the future. If she wants to move, she's going to be priced out of living in a city she's made her home. And you know, that she should feel like she's got to be seen as a good tenant by another private individual. There used to be good, decent council housing in this country. It was all sold off. People felt that they had to buy it, otherwise all the decent stuff was sold off. People bought it because they felt otherwise they were going to lose out. That money, that used, the rents for that council housing that used to go back into your local community and stay within the local economy, is now going into the bank accounts of private landlords.
Okay.
And housing benefit. You know, people that are on housing benefit, their money is, the housing benefit that they get is going back into the pockets of private landlords rather than back into the community.
Okay, thank you. Colin MacIntyre, these controls end next month. What's going to happen after that, in your view?
I have a friend who is a landlord in Edinburgh, and interestingly talking with him recently about this, and that he now has that power month on month, I think, to increase, which he doesn't want to do. And it seems to me that COVID has left a changing landscape sociologically, and also culturally and economically. And I feel that there's, as the gentleman said there, the landlord in the audience, there's obviously a very complex issue, but there just seems a lot of greed generally in society at the moment. There just seems a lot of greed. And going back to the original questioner, Stephen, I was thinking how this is mostly going to affect young people and vulnerable people. My wife's a New Yorker, and actually she was talking recently about the kind of rent control they have there and how that can work for very long periods of time for people to give that security that otherwise wouldn't be able to afford these properties. I don't know if we can learn something from there. I have been a landlord and I've been a tenant. I've never lived in Edinburgh though, so I've never been anybody's landlord in this audience. But it sounds like a worrying state of affairs that affects everyday lives and would be a lot of stress to live within. The last thing I wanted to say was that it seems connected that the rental hiking and the caps being taken away is working alongside the general housing problems in the country and the UK country and becoming almost as big a problem. I was home in Mull recently in Tobermory talking to a neighbour, a lady who lives in the same street I grew up on. And she was explaining to me how the second homes and the Airbnbs become such an issue that she doesn't really know. She knows two people now on the street that she grew up on, that I grew up on. And that really shocked me. I know there's a huge Airbnb issue, but it just seems like it's ripping out communities and really affecting people's lives, whether that be home ownership or rental.
All right, your views on all of that from home, wherever you live. The hashtag is BBCDM. We're off to a flying start. We've got a lot to get through this evening. Tonight we're in Edinburgh. Next week, for the first time ever, we're going to be in Johnstone. So if you'd like to come along and be part of the audience for that show, just go to our website. The address on your screen now, bbc.co.uk/debate. Now let's go to our second question of the night, which comes from Dawn Roberts. Dawn, evening.
Evening. I'd like to ask the panel what their opinions are on the assisted dying bill, and is it time to readdress it again?
Thank you very much. Liam MacArthur's assisted dying bill will be debated later this year in the Scottish Parliament before going to vote. We could be the first part of the UK to change legislation here. What do you think?
Well, my sister Kirsty and I have, unfortunately, in the family, had to watch my 92-year-old grandma die from dementia. And she said many years ago, having watched her two sisters go through the same, that she would never want to live like that. I want to be able to choose now, so my family never have to go through what we've gone through. And I know it's too late for my granny, but I just feel animals that I've had have had better dignity than she has.
Thank you for sharing that with us. It's a big subject for us this evening. Michael Shanks, where do you stand on this?
Well, can I say I had a remarkably similar situation fairly recently, and it did make me rethink this whole question. And I think that the difficulty for me, I don't have a strong view, I have to say, and that might be surprising for a politician to say this, but the difficulty with the legislation that's come forward in the past, Margot MacDonald did a power of work on this, and Liam MacArthur's bill, I think, takes it forward a bit more. But we've never quite been able to get to the point where the safeguards for doctors and for others involved in the system are strong enough. And my mum works in palliative care, and she talks about the power of a good death, about actually providing really good palliative care. The challenge is most of our hospices are charity run. They rely on fundraising. A lot of the actual services that go into them require the goodwill of people rather than actually government funding. So there's a real tension, I think, between the two things. The thing that probably makes me slightly more against it at this point is I'm still not clear what the process is that we get to where genuinely people have capacity to make the decision and where doctors are not put in a position where they're potentially signing off something that they're not comfortable with. And so we'd need some sort of process where doctors could opt out. And I think the danger if you have doctors being able to opt out is that you then have a postcode lottery about whether people can access it or not. So unusually, perhaps, for a politician, I genuinely am not sure. I think this will come to the UK Parliament at some point as well. It's a devolved issue that the Scottish Parliament will look at. I think it's right that these things are always a free vote. So there's not a party position on it, and there never will be from any of us. I don't think it is a personal decision, and it's a really difficult thing to wrestle with, I think.
Sue Webber, we could be the first part of the UK to take the decision on this. How will you vote?
I think over the last few weeks, I've actually been writing columns in the press, and I was interviewed by the Glasgow Herald, where I have expressed my views publicly on this. Again, there's no party political position on this, and it is a free vote. I came to Parliament having worked in healthcare and maybe had a slightly different view to the view that I have now. I have changed direction, and I am, right now where I'm sitting, is I would not be supporting the assisted dying bill. We all have stories, as you've explained, where we've got and seen someone die badly, and it breaks our hearts, and every one of those stories is a tragedy, and it feels hard to sit here. But at the same time, I've done a lot of work, as Michael said, with the role that hospices play and the role that palliative care plays in our society, and having discussions around death and about death. I think if we funded and resources our hospice settings to what they are, as Michael said, they are funded through charity. They're not funded by the NHS. So that gives you some indication of how we view that part of our lives and the end of our lives. And something maybe a bit more critically, you know, the Scottish Parliament, since I've been an MSP in 2021, hasn't got the best reputation about creating good legislation. And the safeguards, although Liam MacArthur's bill has outlines for 2 medical professionals to be involved, and there appear to be safeguards, there's nothing to stop rogue amendments in future parliaments coming forward that may make it really upsetting to some of the decisions that may be made.
All right. Jim Fairlie, you went through with your late brother Andrew a difficult end of life for him, and I hope you don't mind me raising that here this evening, but has that factored into your thinking about this and how you will vote on this?
I am absolutely torn. It's one of these ones that good palliative care is amazing. The people at Cornhill who looked after my brother were fantastic. But there's also that thing about that dignity in death. And if somebody is lying there who has done so much in their life, and now they're saying, just let it happen, I don't know how we stop them making that decision. But I'm also incredibly wary of the lack of safeguards. And Michael talked about it, he touched on it there. And I'm looking, I've been lobbied, and I genuinely do not know how I'm going to vote on this. If I was using my head as a sheep farmer, it'd be done. No question of doubt about it. If I'm looking at it from my heart as a human, then that becomes a lot harder. So the safeguards that were put in other countries have been eroded, as Sue has talked about. But I don't know how that looks. I don't know how we go through the legislation that Liam MacArthur has brought forward and make sure, because we cannot, as a parliament, bound our successors to what it is that we have done. So I have a real conflict in where I'm going to go with this one. I will vote. I won't abstain. I will definitely vote. It'll be one way or the other. But it's one of these situations where you've got absolute Goliaths like Margaret MacDonald, who was absolutely adamant. This has to happen, because she was living it. But then you've got other people saying, but what about my vulnerable relative that, you know, as somebody else influenced their decision? And it's the other thing that has cropped up on a number of occasions is elderly people feeling as though it's their time because their family feel as though they are burdening their family. And I would hate to be in the position where we've legislated so that somebody can take a decision based on feeling like a burden to somebody else. So it's a horrendous question that we are going to have to answer. And I will make my mind up when the time comes, but it's not going to be an easy one.
Jim, I'm sorry to have taken you back to that
Sorry?
time with your brother. Colin MacIntyre, for you on this, what do you want to see our politicians doing?
Well, I think it's reassuring that the politicians will not be three-line whips and all the rest of it, and not be, they will have a kind of free self-opinion vote on it. I think I sympathise with the questioner, and I think all of us can identify and have been through similar scenarios with family members, or potentially similar. I feel ultimately it comes down to personal choice, and it's quite exciting to think that the Scottish Parliament could lead the way in terms of legislation. I do remember the work that Margaret MacDonald did, and that being in the news. You can hear from I'm obviously not a politician. You can hear from the politicians already that you can sort of feel the wrestling with their on either side of a decision. It's a moral issue. And what strikes me is that as citizens, we're units in a political game often enough as it is. And I think it's reassuring that hopefully that won't be the case. Personally, I think of it as being a moral choice.
Would you like to have the choice?
I think I would like to, I know I'd like to have the choice, and I feel that people should have the choice.
Okay, thank you. Lady with the glasses there.
I personally don't know where I stand on it, but if we were to go ahead with it, do you think this is something that should be NHS funded or only available through private healthcare?
Gabriella, Bennett.
I mean, that just adds another layer to what is such an incredibly difficult, thorny, personal and emotive issue. I think Jim still says it best when he says it's a horrendous question, even to try to start to think about it. And I wonder whether part of that is because death is such a difficult question, and whether we shy away from it as a society, and whether it's still a taboo. And, you know, Michael, you talk about this idea of a good death, and that's something that I was reading about recently. And, you know, this idea in palliative care that a doctor comes to you and says, how do you want your death to look? That's a very upfront, forthright question, but it's one that can guarantee at the end of your life small things that make an enormous difference. Whether in the moment you have your dog in with you, that you can bring the dog into the hospital, you know, in your sort of last moments. You know, all these things, trying to wrap your head around them. But I do think it has to be about choice and agency and dignity. What role the NHS and the kind of private healthcare practitioners play in that, I don't know.
Lady with the green jacket on the second row here. Yeah.
I have two friends. One was a former BBC journalist. She was diagnosed with MS. She was able to speak to a camera, write in her own handwriting, and reserve a death at Dignitas. And the friend that took her could never tell anybody that she took her because she would have been arrested. A year later, my very best friend, a very successful interior designer, divorced, age 58, was diagnosed with a glioblastoma and died within 5 months. Now, when you have a glioblastoma, whatever they do, most people, even if you have surgery, and radiation treatment will die within 12 to 16 months. She wanted to die. She did not want to have her sister and myself and her nephew dealing with her personal hygiene and things like that. She lost her ability to speak. I'm afraid the NHS, this is in Wales, was utterly useless. District nurses came to look at blisters on her arm and things, but nobody prepared the family or prepared her to what was going to happen to her. And she wanted to die with dignity. There are safeguards built in. You cannot ever take your life if you have somebody, you know, who has depression or something, because you can get better from that, you know. There are many safeguards. It is time that we kind of got with the program in the 21st century and not left people to die as if they're animals by the side of the road.
Thank you. And the lady just in the middle here. Yeah, and go.
I think nowadays there's so much discussion about having choice, and children are given choice about what gender they want to be recognised as, and we're given so much choice in the life we live. So why do we not get that choice when we want to end that life? If we feel that I don't want to live like this, and I don't mean from a mental health perspective, I mean from a physical health perspective. If I know that my condition is deteriorating, I don't have the quality of life that I would like to live, why are we not allowed to make that choice?
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll come back to this, I know, with the vote later this year. Your views on it all, the hashtag is BBCDN on social media. Let's go to our third question of the night, which comes from David Huggins. David, evening.
Good evening. Scotland and the UK needs economic growth. In my view, taxing more, continually blaming Westminster, Brexit and world problems is not a solution. What is the solution?
David, big question for a panel this evening. Thank you. Sue Webber, you were a fan of Liz Truss. She had a growth commission, didn't she? That didn't last long.
44 days.
44 days. How do we achieve growth here in Scotland and on a UK level?
I think what we've seen in Scotland, which is counter to what's happening elsewhere, is we are not in the same growth position as the economy has been south of the border. We've got a position where we've got depopulation generally, our growth is flat, we're facing higher taxes than elsewhere in the UK. It's really critical that we can turbocharge our economy. And one of the things that we've been calling for is the business rate support that has happened south of the border to really give the businesses across the country the opportunity to get back on their feet and grow again.
Well, it's not that much. 0.7% predicted in Scotland, 0.8 across the UK. It's not that much different south of the border.
Not now, OK? I think, you know, I heard this morning that the Fraser Allender Institute spoke about how it's been a bit of a growth one quarter, recession the next quarter. It's been a bit topsy-turvy in Scotland. I think we are hoping that we will start to grow slightly, but right now our businesses are struggling, and it's encouraging the talent to come to our country when you could be doing a doctor in Dumfries and Galloway or a doctor in Carlisle, and the tax burden you have working on different sides of the border.
So we need more migration?
Well, yes, we do.
Wow.
But we have to remember that, you know, the people that are coming to the UK are not choosing to come to Scotland. The migration, the migrants, the legal migration, they are not choosing to come to Scotland to work in Scotland, and we have to be asking ourselves why that is.
And what would you do about that?
I've already said we would not be having the taxes, the differential in tax that we have between the two parts of the UK.
You think that's what's stopping them coming here at the moment?
It's one of the factors.
Okay. Michael Shanks, Labour's £28 billion green growth economic plan. Is that going to happen?
We've said it's an aspiration we'll build to, and absolutely that 28 billion figure is important because what it's about is moving our economy forward into the economy of the future. We can't stick with the economy that we had 10 years ago, which has delivered nowhere near enough growth. 0.8% growth predicted for this year doesn't deliver the kind of tax take that we need in this country, and constantly increasing income tax is a cover for a no-growth economy. We've seen it. This Parliament is the most tax-raising Parliament of any in history. 25 tax rises since 2019.
So you'll agree with,
and in Scotland,
you'll agree with the freeze on council tax, do you?
Well, I'll come back to that later on because I'm
campaigned on that.
No, I didn't actually. And
it was in your leaflet.
You're the second of my colleagues to recall my leaflets. I'm fascinated by the SNP's focus on my leaflets in my by-election. What I'd said was I was against your 25% increase in council tax in a cost of living crisis. There's a world of difference between 0%, which is going to hammer local communities with cuts, and 25%, which will hurt people in the pocket. There's a middle ground there that you've chosen to take out of the table. But on the issue about growth, because again, we've got this constant fixation with taxation. Taxation's part of the issue, but it brings in more revenue if there's growth in the economy. So we've said we've got ambitious plans for moving into the green future that we need, which will bring skills, which will bring jobs, but will crucially bring inward investment. And yes, that requires some pump priming funding from the government, but the idea of what we've said is that investment over time will refill that pot, and then that will invest in more industry, and eventually what you get to is growth in the economy, because that's the only way we're going to get out of the situation we're in at the moment.
Michael, Labour have said they won't reintroduce a cap on bankers' bonuses. Is that part of your plan for growth?
Well, I think we opposed the Conservatives removing the cap on bankers' bonuses. We supported it at the time because we'd come out of a financial crisis where people working in the financial services sector did not act responsibly. But at the moment, that's not a priority for us. We're not going to rush to reintroduce it. But if we see that behaviour again, there's nothing to stop us doing it. But I think the crucial thing with the bankers' bonus was actually people just found other ways to remunerate themselves that didn't involve a bonus. And people ended up still having increased pay packets despite the ban on bankers' bonuses. It didn't particularly work. And again, it's not a choice between one thing or another. We need to see growth in the economy. Increased taxes from the Conservatives, from the chaos of the Liz Truss era, or increased tax on people earning £29,000 from the SNP. Neither of these are going to lead to growth in the economy. We need a new path, and it's not going to be with either of our current governments.
Jim, I'll come to you in a second. Gentleman on the end of the road there, how do we achieve economic growth?
It's just been really disappointing the past few years, particularly in Edinburgh. The council tax freeze has really come home to roost. How poor the public services are. As they mentioned earlier, these council houses need materials, and it feels like we've hiked taxes to compensate for that. And it feels like for all these years we had that freeze. That was the time we should have, made hay while the sun was shining. And it's so disappointing to see the state of so many things in Edinburgh right now. And I just don't see the way out of it apart from constant cuts to try and balance the books. Like, you think of libraries, schools, public roads. It's really, really disappointing, this council tax. It was a great idea perhaps at the time, but it's really short-sighted, I think.
OK, economic growth provides the seed funding for everything around that and the services that we provide. How are you going to provide it moving forward, Jim Fairlie?
Well, the £28 billion that is being rolled back by the Labour Party, amongst many other things that the Labour Party are rolling back on, because they keep rolling back.
Are you rolling back?
A party that's not in government, Jim. You've been in government for 17 years this year, so it's about taking some responsibility.
The Labour Party have given pledges that are going to sit and they're going to land in Middle England into an English audience, and that's where they've sat. And as they get closer and closer to that election, they just keep rolling back. So the £28 billion that they've taken out of the green economy is funding that we absolutely need. It's 100% one of the areas where Scotland has an absolute gold mine sitting on our doorsteps, and yet that funding is not there. Not your fault, their fault, that the Acorn project didn't get up and running. So we've got huge resources here in Scotland. And I'm sorry, I know that you're saying we always blame Westminster. I want to sit in a parliament. I want to sit in a parliament where I can tell you today, if you vote for me, I will deliver this, this and this. And in 5 years' time, when I come back to you, I'll say, will you vote for me again? You'll say no, because you didn't deliver that, that and that. And I can with absolute legitimacy, say to you, I couldn't do that because they control those areas.
OK, hang on a second.
So we've got that position.
Take the gentleman's point about the council tax cut. You're going to vote on that this week. Will you vote for it or not?
We're in the constitutional position where the big decisions that we want to make in this country are curtailed on the basis of decisions that are made elsewhere.
All right.
A 10% cut,
you made that point, Jim.
10% cut means £1.4 billion has come out of our capital spend.
Hang on a second,
year.
hang on a second. That man's desperate to come in the middle. On you go. Yes.
I asked the question originally, and the way you've answered there, you've had time. You've had things to do. I'm saying that it needs to change. We need to start doing it. But when politicians keep having to go at, you haven't done this, you haven't done that, the voters don't want that anymore.
Yeah, I agree.
We're fed up. We're adult people. We need you to look at these things. You mentioned housing, and you can't get people to fix it. Apprenticeships, get housing built. All these sticking plasters that the gentleman there spoke about.
That doesn't stop it today. If you're going to have an apprentice, we've got an apprenticeship. We've just had a Withers review. We're looking at how we get people into the industries that we need to get. But we've got to be able to make sure that the things that we're doing can be filled now. If we can't have immigration, my background is food and drink and farming. It's crying out for people. But the immigration policy of the Tories has absolutely decimated it. And it's social care, whether it's the NHS, whether it's hospitality, whether it's food and drink, whether it's farming, all of these areas are desperate for people, and we can't fill these jobs because of Brexit. So, and I swear to God, I absolutely get the frustration that politicians, that you feel at politicians, but you want to sit in my chair, the frustration that I feel that I'm a businessman. I want to see things getting done. I hate the fact that we're sitting here blaming him, blaming her, and we don't have the powers to
All right.
Hang
on a second. Colin MacIntyre.
I've just had a really surreal thought as I was watching, imagining with your previous occupation, Jim, as a sheep farmer, that you would both, Michael and Jim, having this argument on a hillside somewhere, and if it would have... I think...
It'd be more productive.
I think... I feel that, back to that word, greed, but I think there's a lot of money not being distributed fairly in this country and also UK-wide. And it's interesting just listening to the politicians debating, and I'm sure with best intentions. And I think, even hearing the words Liz Truss, 44 days. I've actually been on tour for longer than Liz Truss was the Prime Minister. And I would say, and that's not even talking about the vegetable lifespan of a vegetable, I would say that what we need is two words: better leadership. And I feel that the gentleman who asked the question talked about the kind of UK-wide excuses or issues. Personally, I feel Brexit is an absolute disaster and will be proven to be so. But I also think that... but bringing it back to, I think, as the questioner wants us to do, back to Scotland, and I feel, how do we improve the economy? Celebrate what we have, celebrate our culture, make things again, you know, train young people, make things so that things can be bought. And I would say one other thing I would add in, and you could say, well, I would say this, but I feel that the arts and the culture of Scotland, like Ireland, like the Celtic nations, is a huge benefit, and we need to invest in it more, celebrate it more, because we make money from it. People come and watch it, live, breathe it, enjoy it, and I think that's one area of the sector that is been failed and needs to be improved on.
Colin, thank you. Let's hear from the audience. Lady with the glasses first. Yes.
I'm an immigrant, so it's quite interesting to hear these comments about immigration. I'm also a nurse. I have been lucky enough, I love Edinburgh, I've been lucky enough to live here for quite a few years, and it has been impossible, practically, at almost every opportunity to get a visa and stay. I have multiple degrees from Scotland. I have experience as a nurse in the United States. And I don't currently work as a nurse in the NHS. I work at coffee shops. I have just finished a degree in public health. I've been trying to get registered as a nurse for almost 2 years. I have spent money, time, I pay my taxes, I pay an extra fee to use the NHS when all I want to do is help you with it. And I love Scotland and I love my friends here, and there's nothing I want more than to stay. But I can get a better job that pays more in the US, no questions asked. I've done it. And it breaks my heart that I almost had to leave in December, and it broke my heart. And it's just, it's quite shocking to hear a Conservative admit that immigration might be part of the answer, because the Conservative government in broadly the UK has made it almost impossible for me to stay.
Okay, so Sue, you said You want to see more migrants? Here's one here, but she can't stay.
I'm not aware of your initial circumstances, but it is interesting to hear specifically of your challenges. We do need to encourage healthcare professionals, and we do have a migration programme that allows the skills gaps that we have in those professional things to come in and work.
Well, it ain't working, is it?
Well, not from this lady's.
I did a degree in public health to try and hurry it along and wait while I was waiting to get registered with the NHS, and it's been almost 2 years of me arguing bureaucratics at every step of the process. And it's only because I'm currently on a postgraduate visa, which I am lucky enough to get, that I'm even still in the country hoping to someday use my nursing degrees and experience to help the NHS.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much indeed for sharing that. Lady with the glasses on the second row here. Yeah, on you go.
Yeah, you asked for a fresh opinion. I left the UK 30 years ago and I came back last year. I was lucky enough to have visa-free access to go and work in Hong Kong, but I could also then, during my career, go and hone my language skills in France and go and stay, or go and find friends in Germany, go stay there, gain work experience. Like 3.5 million other overseas Brits, I didn't get a vote in the referendum. I saw plans, investment go up in smoke. Through all those years, we are those people, those Brits that are working outside of the country are creating value that is not in the UK, and then we bring it back. We have our parents here, we invest here, we pay tax here. What I'd like to see for my kids is for them to have the same opportunities that I had to go out, create value, and bring it back to this country. And as for attracting people to Edinburgh, I mean, it is an absolutely wonderful city to come back to because of the arts and the culture, and because of all the different languages, all the different people that you have here. Just let the people use their skills, and that will create the value for you. The number of times that we just think, well, I could be working, I could be doing that, but I need a visa now, or, you know, there's some other rigmarole or reason why I can't. So,
what a fascinating audience you are tonight. Man on the front row down here.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about my time. I went to university here 25 years ago, and then started working online retail, and used to go over to Dublin a lot. And I'd say Edinburgh and Dublin at the time very much on a par. And I look at the places now, you've got Google, LinkedIn, PayPal, all investing massively in Dublin. Why aren't they coming here? It's just as beautiful, if not, I prefer it here personally, but it's because of taxes, corporation tax, income tax, and you know, all the people making the big decisions, they're not the janitors, the cooks, the cleaners, it's the top people earning more money. So, you know, bankers' bonuses, you don't want to cap it because those people making decisions, they're not going to say, let's go to Scotland. It's like a turkey voting for Christmas.
Okay. Thank you. Can I get Gabriella Bennett? How do we encourage economic growth here, across the UK, here in Scotland?
I think it's really interesting to hear the audience, their responses there, because I do think there's this idea of bringing in value, but also making the most of the residents we have here already. You know, I'm not an economist, I'm not a politician, I don't have minutiae level detail into like how to stimulate economic growth, but I am a resident of Scotland. I went to university here, lived here, worked here, and it's not just these industries that have been really, you know, decimated. There are some people tell me so often that their particular sector has just, there are no jobs in it. And it seems to be especially the case in Scotland, or the jobs that are there are so precarious, so poorly paid, that actually making a life here and staying here becomes increasingly untenable. You know, even in journalism, the media landscape in Scotland has become so denuded. The idea, we have this thing where it's, you know, we call it a brain drain, and people go to university, and if they want to be journalists, and they leave and go to London and then come back. We should be working out how to enrich these jobs and these sectors. We should be funding things, you know, Colin, you touched on arts and music, and I would extend that and look at literature. We've got some absolutely fantastic, wonderful authors. I was just going to
say the same thing. What great storytellers we have. Celebrate them, invest in them, because it brings people to our culture.
Absolutely. Why are we not making more of them? Why, instead of not making more of them, are we doing the exact opposite of slashing arts funding so badly that it's almost impossible to be an author in Scotland?
The arts funding as well. We're sitting in Edinburgh College, which is a powerhouse, or can be a powerhouse, for creating and springboarding the economy for the east of Scotland. £56 million has been taken out of further and higher education budgets last year. You know, and this college does a great job for supporting small and medium-sized businesses across the region, but the Flexible Workforce Development Fund has disappeared. I mean, these are things that support small businesses, which is the powerhouse of innovation and employs so many people in this part of the country.
Okay, and we've still got hands up on this evening, but I want to get to another question as well, and we're up against the clock this evening. Hashtag is BBCDN. Your thoughts on all of this? Colin has our next question tonight. Colin Calder. Evening, Colin.
Hello, hi. So, if non-air polluting electric vehicles become more common in Edinburgh, should traffic flow be the priority rather than blocking roads and creating no-go areas, which results in traffic jams, long tailbacks and delays?
Right, interesting. So actually sales of electric cars dipped 25% last month, but here in Edinburgh there are proposals to restrict traffic flow through the city centre to try and cut vehicle movements by about 30%. Gabriella Bennett.
I'm very interested in this, not only from a climate perspective, you know, an emissions perspective, but also in I suppose in an urban planning perspective, looking at ways in which we're going to see Edinburgh change in the next, 10 years, 5 years, 2 years. The idea of rerouting traffic from the city centre. So last week it was announced by the City of Edinburgh Council that they had proposed to close these streets, the Cowgate, parts of the Old Town, Princes Street, close them to traffic, pedestrianise them, and reroute traffic through other parts, boundary roads they called them, so Queen Street and a variety of others. So it's not so much, clearing traffic from the city centre. I mean, traffic's still there, the cars are still there, they're just somewhere else in, it's approximately 250 metres that way. But what it creates in those places is a very different feeling, a different atmosphere. And it's no coincidence to me that those streets are the places that tourists go. They are tourist traps, tourist thoroughfares. So you have to question the intentions and the goals of the City of Edinburgh Council as to why exactly that's happening. The cynic might say, actually, are we just trying to go even further with this Disneyfication of Edinburgh? Who are we serving? Are we serving residents or are we serving tourists? And I think what's even more interesting is there was a fascinating survey that was out as part of these proposals that looked at the plans and had a really interesting quote from a resident. And the resident said, we want less traffic, fewer cars on the road. And the author of this survey, it was a leader of the council leader, I believe. He said, we're just doing what the residents have told us, And that kind of finger pointing, I think we have to be very careful there, because I don't believe that when we say, when residents say, I want less traffic on my street if I live on the Cowgate but I mean, who even does live on Princes Street? I don't necessarily think they mean myself. I think they mean the hordes of minibuses, the tourist coaches, and actually does not having a car and being able to drive my groceries to my door, my IKEA bookcase and get it in without having to traipse it through the city centre. Am I being served well enough by my council?
Right, we might try and hear from some of the residents. We've got time. Colin MacIntyre.
Well, it's very interesting, some of the points that Gabriella makes and how it's maybe just moving problems to other parts of cities. I think that I'm sort of coming at it from just a human being point of view, first of all. And I was just thinking today that being back at Edinburgh Airport, I was once there and I saw that Tony Benn was on the same flight. And I thought, anyway, I liked some of what he represented and liked his voice, really. I was looking for a collaborator at that time. By the end of the flight, I'd spoken to him, and on the way in at Heathrow, decided we'd write a song together. I swear this happened. And the song that he decided was, we came up with a title called Pay Attention to the Human. And he had these words that he'd given me, which he did a spoken word at the end of the song, which was, we have the power to end the world. We have the power to save the world. There lies the human debate. Now, that's not necessarily a party political point at all. And I suppose, ultimately, these very, these policies that are put in place, again, I don't live in Edinburgh, but that obviously is affecting day-to-day lives. It's interesting when that bigger issue of climate issue starts to impact day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
And what do we do with that? And so you can look at the kind of bigger picture, the macro level of, well, we have to at some point make changes. You know, we have to change as a society. We have to make these changes.
Colin, we're running out of time here.
But yeah, I don't live in the city, but I can understand that it's a very complex issue. But maybe it takes us to other places and we appreciate other streets.
Let's see where it takes. We've got 30 seconds each on this. Sue Webber.
Oh, 30 seconds, that is very difficult. You know, I live in the city. I love the city. I also love our public transport system, but I'm horrified by what the council is about to do. If you get on a bus in the west of the city, you will have to get off at Haymarket. The bus will no longer go through the city centre. You will be expected to get off and go on a boundary route on some sort of transport, a scooter, a bus, walk, bus, no idea. Doesn't matter how able or unable you are to do so, and then get on a bus at Waterloo Place to carry on your journey. It is absolutely crackers.
Jim Fairlie.
Well, I'm not an Edinburgh resident, but the only thing, because we're short of time, the only thing I'm going to say is if they close the Cowgate, I won't know how to get to Parliament, because that's how I drive down the road.
Let's close the Cowgate.
Michael Shanks.
I mean, again, I'm from the West Coast, so I don't know the Edinburgh specific, but your question's about traffic flow, and it strikes me, if we're talking about moving to electric cars, it still doesn't solve the issue of traffic flow. What I'd rather see is huge investment in public transport. We're seeing bus routes being cut all over the country. That's the route where we really deal with the climate crisis, is to get cars off the road completely. But it will only happen if people have an alternative means to get around, and that's why we need to invest in public transport.
OK, this is going to affect all of you. Let's quickly hear from gentlemen towards the back there. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's remember that we have a city which was built long before mass car ownership was possible or even thought of. Residents in the city centre were never asked if they wanted the city to be choked with traffic. It just happened that way. So I think that people being consulted about returning to the status quo that was before mass car ownership is a positive thing.
Yeah.
And we should consider that actually we've just become so used to the city being choked with traffic that we no longer think of it as being unusual, when in fact it actually is.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Your views on all of that. Hashtag is BBCDN on social media. That is it for tonight. We're out of time. We're back next week in Johnson, our first time there. If you'd like to be part of the audience, come along, go to the website to get involved. If you missed any of tonight's show, we're repeated a little bit later on BBC One Scotland, or you can watch it any time that suits you on the BBC iPlayer. Thank you very much indeed to my panel here tonight and to our audience here in Edinburgh, and of course to you at home watching wherever you are. We'll see you next week in Johnson. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well. From all of us in Debate Night, good night.